Hi everyone, this is Chanchai again, and it is May 18th still, a Wednesday, and I'm going to respond to a question that I got on Discord. The question is from Rob himself, is the username, and they're asking me about what I think about arcade controller parts. You know, they saw that I'm into that, but specifically what I think about what I think are good for Virtua Fighter, and which arcade controller parts I think are maybe not so good for Virtua Fighter. So I'm going to respond to that, and it's based on my experience up to this point. There is still a lot of arcade controller parts that I'm still trying out. I have not spent enough time with Seimitsu, though I do have some Seimitsu levers I'll be trying out. I do have experience with Seimitsu buttons. I'll probably put my perspective in there. But yeah, so let's start off by saying that the key word, especially when you get into Korean levers, but also through all of arcade controller parts, the key word is preference. It's important for people to, well, it helps for people to know what their preferences are. I might have an idea of what I think is objectively better for Virtua Fighter and why, but at the same time, it might not still be the objectively best for you, because it will matter to your preferences. You might have more sensitive hands. You might be like Tricky in the VF community, who values the side of themselves that's a musician playing saxophone. And so for them, for Tricky, what's really important is that, yes, performance is a must, but also if it can offer more comfort or less damage, then that's gonna be an overriding factor. You know, when you compare it to like pieces, and they use all buttons, so for them they're mainly concerned about buttons, and then they're also concerned about the ergonomics of their layout and the panel they're using, though I don't think they've looked into that as much yet. But currently they use Hitbox, and before they were using a converted Quanba Obsidian that was functioning as a button box. Okay, so again, that's preference. Preference matters, and also personal circumstances matter. Right? And for me, my favorite control style is levers. So we have 3 types of control schemes that are popular. We actually have 4. So number 1 is going to be the arcade stick, or stick and buttons, or lever and buttons, and that is like the classic arcade setup, and I am biased towards that. Number 2, let's talk about hitbox style. Hitbox style, or all button controllers, because we don't want to all say that they're all like Hitbox. They're different companies that represent them, that represent similar styles now. But we can call it leverless, but I think all button controller is better. And these are based on arcade buttons. So specific, you know, usually round plungers, about 30 millimeter or 24 millimeters are the common sizes. Okay. And a distinct feature of those is that the up button is actually placed where your thumb is, because this layout is heavily influenced by keyboarding, by playing fighting games, or more specifically platform games or action games, retro ones, on a PC using a keyboard, in which case instead of your fingers being on like WASD, it's probably on ASD with your thumb on space, and your thumb being a jump button. And in a 2D fighter, up is usually the jump button. So the logic is they've derived this very ergonomic layout. It is less intuitive, but very ergonomic. Okay, that is all button layout that we're talking about there. Then we have the WASD layout, championed by things like Cardimod and Odin Mod by Omni Games, and that is basically sticking 4 keyboard keys where the direction is, and putting them in a layout that's just like a first-person shooter. The WASD layout, or WASD is what I call it, and and then they use buttons for the actions. You know, same buttons as an arcade stick, same buttons as an all button layout. Okay, for action buttons, for the action buttons. And then finally we have Gamepad. Gamepad is the classic default on console and what you're settling with in console in the past. And while it has carried stigmas, it's actually a very valid, extremely valid input device. In fact, you know, a game series that has a very unique controller's input like Virtua On, I would argue that Gamepad is technically the best way to play Virtua On, but I personally always play it with twin sticks. It's what I'm used to. I twitch with it. I vibe with that. I have gamepads, and I do sometimes play with Gamepad, and I personally like twin stick better. But when I look at it objectively and theoretically, Gamepad is actually, if you get used to it, it's probably the very best way to play a Virtua On game. It really is. So people don't need to hold out and not play until they get twin sticks, even though a lot of people do. But I think it's kind of because we like the identity of Virtua On and what it represents as an arcade game. But the truth be told, if we were playing this game competitively and it was available on rollback on PC, we probably should be playing it on pad if you're asking me. But I'm still going to play it on twin stick out of stubbornness. But I would tell anybody, like, Gamepad is actually better for that game. So it's really interesting. I have a clear, strong preference to twin stick then. Okay. So those are the 4 controller types: arcade stick, all button, WASD, and then of course Gamepad. Okay. Virtua Fighter works with, the good thing about Virtua Fighter, its input requirements are usually, in general, not very difficult. It really is. They really aren't. They are different motions than what a lot of people are used to, unless they're coming from Mortal Kombat or maybe Soul Calibur. So that's usually the hang-up. If you come from Mortal Kombat or Soul Calibur, you probably have an easier time wrapping your head around how you're going to control Virtua Fighter, at least on the very general level. But do I think my preference is arcade stick. I'm biased towards it. But however, I do play it on all the other methods, and I do try. The only method that was difficult for me was actually the WASD. So with a WASD, I would prefer to modify a WASD to be like an all-button controller, and there's 2 ways to do that, right? One is to actually just make the thumb arcade button. Another is to use something like the thumbs up add-on for the Cardi mod, which basically hooks up to the Cardi mod, and you can end up having a mini space bar that you can put on your arcade controller. That method, I like that input style. I just don't like the WASD because I don't like my middle finger doing double duty for up and down. I find that really frustrating for me. I find it anti-ergonomic, but there are people that swear by this. It works really well for them. So maybe it's a preference, maybe it's a matter of technique, maybe it's a matter of how your muscles are trained in your hand. But WASD itself is not my cup of tea, but I found people that really like it. Okay, so that said, we have to acknowledge another point. In Virtua Fighter, the developers of Virtua Fighter, all the way up until Final Showdown, designed these games to be played in the arcade. They designed it for arcade levers and buttons, and there is a story that I've heard that long ago, and I don't know which Virtua Fighter this was, Sega AM2 talked to the players and asked them, which arcade lever is your preference? Which is the standard? And I believe when this happened, Seimitsu sticks, maybe the LS32, were the most popular ones in the arcade. Maybe that was the standard. Someone told me something like that. But my understanding is that at the time, the VF players, told Sega that SANWA was, out of the Japanese levers that they had tried out, SANWA was the very best. And so the SANWA JLF became, like, at some point Sega made that the standard and what they test Virtua Fighter on. So understand that Virtua Fighter games for a long time have been designed for the SANWA JLF. and to be used with the buttons. That said, let's separate America from Japan. We're talking about playing Virtua Fighter in Japan when we talk about that story, because in America they could care less probably. They just build what looks nice, and the classic Virtua Fighter 1 and 2 cabinets, they're not very ergonomic and they're not even consistent. The way guard, punch, and kick are angled are totally different between player 1 and player 2. You know, and even though there were colored sticks that were probably ultimate sticks, maybe, you know, I think in the old Virtua Fighter days, I would prefer the HAP competition over the HAP Ultimate for Virtua Fighter. But nowadays, I'm not crazy about HAP anymore, but I was back in the VF 1, 2, and 3 days. So, you know, it's American levers and buttons. I do think the HAP stick and buttons still work, but I do think my hands would be incredibly tired using using HAP push buttons because of how much actuation force is needed to actuate with them and just pushing them down. I think my hand would get so damn tired. So that I kind of ruled that out. So let's go to the question about then. Let's isolate it and let's talk about levers and buttons that I think are good for Virtua Fighter. Okay. Specifically the Virtua Fighter we play now, Final Showdown, which is now also Ultimate Showdown. They're the same game for the most part. Okay. So levers. My opinion, out of what I've played so far, I have not yet played. I am going to be playing with more Seimitsu levers this summer, but I have no opinion on them right now because I have not been playing them. And I will be testing Virtua Fighter out on Seimitsu levers this summer. I'll be testing it out on the Nobi, on the LS32, the LSQ40, which is the silent version of the LS40, and I probably will try it out on the LS56 as well. So just a heads up, that's coming in the future. And that doesn't factor at all into what I say today. Okay. I have tried a bunch of levers so far. Korean levers, Japanese levers. I do have a bias right now when it comes to Virtua Fighter, but I am also still exploring. Especially the Korean levers, I'm still exploring them. But let's talk about so far what has been really good. What's really stood out and why. I would say for me, there's a three-way tie on what I think is the best levers out of what I've played for Virtua Fighter. And those three are a modified SANWA JLF, modified with the Otto DIY V5. So Otto's do-it-yourself V5 mod. What this mod does to the SANWA JLF, and I do think stock SANWA JLF is amazing on Virtua Fighter, but I prefer it modified with Otto V5. And the Otto V5, it reduces the area of movement, so you don't get to move as far, but it also reduces the friction dramatically in your motions, so that you're moving the lever way faster. And what people say smoother, but what they mean is that faster without any interruption, hence smoother, because you've lowered the friction coefficient. And because you have, but also because the housing, JLF housing by default, it's not the most stable, but it works really well, but it's not the most stable. Otto DIY, all of their mods really have a very tight fit to them. Everything is held tight together. This reduces jankiness, this reduces wear and tear, this means that it'll last longer. However, I've been able to play stock SANWA JLFs for 12 years until they started showing their wear and tear. So let's give credit to SANWA that a lot of times if the JLF isn't broken from the beginning, in my experience, it can last a long time. But I'm not as violent with the lever as a lot of players are. I'm kind of gentle, kind of tough too. I hit my gates a little hard, but I don't slam it so often, and I don't ride the gate as hard. You know, Japanese levers, we ride the gate. That's the restriction on the movement, which is normally a square, and I like the square very much. I'm biased towards that too. Okay, so modified SANWA JLF is one of the 3 favorites for Virtua Fighter out of what I've used. Another favorite is Sanjuks V3. Sanjuks V3 is Sanjuks is Korean for bandit, and the creator of Sanjuks V3 his nickname is Bandit. And so this is one man making these arcade levers on his weekends for players, and they are amazing. He's an artisan. He looks for superior materials, lowering coefficient, enhancing stability. He looks at every part and he makes these things with love. Not to say that's not frustrating to make them, but he pours his passion into it. And so with the Sanjuks V3, you are getting a Korean man's artisan build with high attention to detail and high quality parts, making a Japanese style lever. Japanese style levers are defined by a pivot and spring model where the shaft is going through a pivot that sits in like a cup, right? Which we might call the core. And basically you get to swivel the lever through that, and the main counter resistant force that keeps the lever back to neutral is a spring. Okay, there's of course the aspects of the actuator, the body, and the switch alignments, and other aspects too that make it very important. But that's how the Japanese levers work, and the Sanjuks V3 is a Japanese style lever, but again made by someone who's coming from Korea who has a huge passion for these. And it is the Sanjuks V3 is often compared to both SANWA and Seimitsu. Some people say that it's kind of a hybrid of the two. What I can say is it's amazing. So if I was to say like a SANWA JLF feels like a really good Toyota to me, and that's a high compliment. I have a lot of respect for Toyota as a car company, and as a mass manufacturer that has made high quality vehicles available to every man. Okay. Sanjuks V3 to me, then I would compare, like in its feel, I would compare it to a BMW. Why? The Sanjuks V3, there's a very machined feel to it. Just like when you drive a BMW, its steering wheel communicates to you directly that you're going to have to take control of this thing, but it's going to work for you. And it's hard to explain why, but the Sanjuks V3 kind of has this feeling. Some people try to say it feels like the directions are sucking you into their inputs, and then quickly letting you go back to the neutral, right? That it's this very machined feel, and it's awesome, and it's really good, and you feel the high quality. But just like with the BMW, where you feel the grip of the road when you drive that thing, when on the Sanjuks V3, you kind of feel like you're inputting. You feel like it's you and the game together doing this. So Sanjuks V3 I give a lot of high praise. On the JLF, I actually further modded from the Otto DIY V5 because I put a stainless steel pivot in there. I also put a stainless steel pivot in the Sanjuks V3, and it makes a huge difference in both. It makes them move even faster and smoother than they were in their default state. No grease needed when you do that, because when you move a really good machined stainless steel pivot through the high quality, low friction coefficient plastic core or cup, then you get like incredibly smooth motions. So that's number 2. So what's number 3? My third favorite, actually, and this is not in order because this third favorite actually might be my top favorite if I'm being honest, but all 3 I love for different reasons. They all feel different. The third on the list, on the top 3, is the Golden Lever. But the thing about the Golden Lever is a platform. Golden Lever are arcade levers that you're supposed to tune them to your preference. You're supposed to figure out what your preference is and keep trying it until you find the thing that's perfect and you go with that. The level of customization is off the charts. There is nothing else I've seen in arcade levers that lets you customize the way that you can customize a golden lever. At least off the bat, and at least without doing some weird Frankensteining, you know. So the golden lever has a lot of things that make it smooth. It is built on Korean lever design principles. So it does have a housing, and in that housing has instead of a pivot and core, what it's got grommets, silicone grommets. And those silicone grommets are a really nice dynamic form of resistance. Way more dynamic than the spring, right? Much more dynamic. On the spring pivots, you don't really feel dynamic tension in them, though there are new springs that do that for you now, and so that's interesting. But with grommets, you really get a dynamic feel that's would feel like the best analog for you, you know? Something like that. More tighter than an analog stick, but it's in that ballpark. And you feel it much better than you feel a spring usually. But I'm going to be trying dynamic spring soon. So golden lever is in my favorites list as well. But I also had to modify it a lot. The modifications I did to the golden lever make it more of closer to a Japanese build, even though it's using grommets. There is a spring inside. Korean levers don't normally have a spring. Golden lever has a spring, but the spring is there for different reasons. It does ensure fit, and it makes sure that the spring makes sure that everything is a tight fit together. It reinforces that, but it also makes it so you can't really spin the ball top or bat top much unless you use a lighter spring. So it's interesting how that works as well. But all these little parts of the golden lever, especially what I like are like the bearing actuators. That's where instead of the actuator being like a big cylinder that just hits the switches and then maybe hits a gate or something on the Japanese style, on the golden lever, the actuator, there's many types that they offer, and the type I like to use are bearing actuators, where the part that touches the micro switch is basically a small wheel and a small bearing, and it basically enforces smooth motion because it's just rotating. So I do grease this thing up pretty often, and so it just adds to the smoothness of all the motions of every moving part. Every part of the golden lever is very smooth. So when you hit, so what does it mean to hit your preference? It means that you want to that I'm able to make the stick move as far as I want, and I've been able to make it actuate, hit the direction as early or late as I want. And so with that, I've made it very tight. I've made it so that it's tight like the JLF Otto V5. I instantly get my directions, but I have a nice neutral. The neutral's just where I want it. I can hit the full range of movement, hits just where I want it. So I get to control how big of my movement area it is and how quickly the button presses are. And then I get to control like how tight it is. And the thing I found is that on Korean levers, high tension is really like heavy, and it's a dramatic difference. When it comes to making it a Japanese style and also making it so you're not moving that far, then that tension you can do with higher tension just because you're not moving the stick that far. With grommets, the further you move the stick, the more tension you get, the more resistance to go back, right? And actually, Virtua Fighter is a game where high tension is probably better anyways. But on my Japanese, like, golden lever, I can go pretty much any tension will feel pretty comfortable. And lately I found that the medium tension, the 50A, is really, really good. Even though most Japanese setups of the golden lever will go with 35A. So, or even a 30A. But this 50A is working great for me, and I might move it up just because of that. Because of interesting aspects. I'm still playing around with the golden lever, but where I have it right now, it's fantastic, and it plays every bit as good or better than the other two. So right now, all three of those, 100%, I don't get execution problems on those three. So on the lever front, what would be difficult? Why are these three good on Virtua Fighter? So Virtua Fighter is pretty simple on inputs. What you really need in Virtua Fighter, you're going to be in neutral a lot. And so in Virtua Fighter, you want to move the lever only, like, you want to be able to actuate very quickly. But also you want a good neutral that you can trust. And I believe all three of those that I'd mentioned meet that criteria. The golden lever, if you build it the way you need it, that works for you, then 100%. But you do have to get there. That's the difference there, is that from its stock form, it may or may not be where you like it. And you may have to get more parts and experiment to get the setting you want. And that's what the golden lever is about. It's about tinkering until you get the perfect lever for you. Sanjuks V3 out of the gate, really good at this. Really good at what Virtua Fighter wants. And then also really good at actuation. SANWA, the modified SANWA is where I really love it. Absolutely love it for actuation. The stock SANWA JLF is probably a little bit, slightly bigger than that. Slightly bigger movement area, slightly a little more before I hit the switch. But it's so good. And it works for most people. SANWA JLF really, really nails it for a lot of people in Virtua Fighter. But is there room for more? Yeah. That's why we're talking about this topic. A lot of people could, I'm willing to bet that when I try the Seimitsu levers, I'm gonna find a lever that feels so perfect for VF, maybe even more than the JLF. I have a feeling about that. But the stock SANWA JLF is amazing on Virtua Fighter, but I do like the area of movement and the actuation to just be a little tighter. I like to hit my directions a little sooner, or with a little less movement. And that's the point there. But all three of these do really good with that. But when you do the Otto V5, 100%, like, it's pretty much hits it at perfect for me. So when I do the modified JLF, okay. What else does Virtua Fighter need? Virtua Fighter also needs, you have to deal with stagger. And so Virtua Fighter needs speed. It needs rapid speed between directions. You need accuracy with that, but you want to be able to hit directions really fast. This is where the Japanese levers tend to have an advantage over the Korean levers. The Korean levers, you can develop the same speed, but usually you have to minimize your movement and not, like on the Japanese levers, I can like ricochet off the gate, I can hit the stick all the way to the left, then hit it all the way to the right. I can spin it in a circle and make sure I'm hitting every switch really fast, but that I'm doing it in a very tight circle compared to on a Korean lever where it might be a much bigger circle. And I might be going way far to the right, way far to the left. So on the Korean lever, I'm more encouraged not to hit the wall, I'm encouraged not to try to ricochet. Instead, it would be encouraging the player to spin circles and tighter circles. Maybe one day we'll talk about the science of breaking staggers, because I will say that there is a case to be made where a Korean lever actually might have unique advantages there, but it's really weird and it would require a lot of technique as opposed to just an out-of-the-box experience. And out of the box, that Japanese lever is probably going to get you the stagger break a little better. And again, all three of the levers I mentioned, fantastic at this. At stagger breaking, I get my fastest stagger breaks on those three, and that's one of the metrics I use. I mentioned earlier about ricocheting, and so tighter area of movement means that ricocheting is an advantage in VF. It might not be in other games. It might create more sloppiness, But in Virtua Fighter, a lot of your motions are like the Mortal Kombat motions. There's like tap a direction, tap the same direction twice, back and then forward is a motion. I would actually say the best test of a lever for Virtua Fighter, for me anyways, is a simple input. It is back and then diagonal down forward. So you tap back and then you tap the diagonal between down and forward. Sounds so simple. And yet this is the thing where I will struggle the most with levers that are not as ideal for Virtua Fighter, because and how comfortable I am using that lever with Virtua Fighter is going to be how consistent I am with that motion. So test again, back and then into down forward. Some characters have the input forward and then down back, but you get the idea. You go from a primary side direction into a diagonal down direction. And this simple motion is a strong test for how good a lever does in Virtua Fighter. In fact, on the SANWA JLF stock, I would say that my accuracy is high, but it's not the highest when I do this motion. When I do the SANWA JLF with the Otto V5, it's like 100%. And that's why I personally prefer smaller area of movement in Virtua Fighter, and the diagonals being closer to me than if I was using a Korean lever, because in Virtua Fighter, this motion is very important for me. This motion is important for me to continue my combos and maximize damage with my character. But it's also a motion that does exist for other characters too. Not as much, but that's a very simple test for what I'm going to need in a lever for Virtua Fighter. So those are my favorites. What are levers that are hard to use in Virtua Fighter? Okay. Your classic Tekken levers have actually been the ones that are the most difficult for me. I love playing on them. I love experimenting with them. I love learning the techniques. I love that a lot of the Tekken levers, you know, like a Fujin V3 or the Sanjuks V6 or even the Sanjuks V5, right? Or the Fanta levers like the Myeongshin Fanta and the Taeyong Fanta, and you know, even the golden lever Fanta stick, which is based on the green Fanta, the green lever. So using these levers, they're still great at Virtua Fighter. Look, Virtua Fighter is going to work with whatever you're comfortable with. That one I'm very sure of. But for me, the reason that it's less ideal on Virtua Fighter is a lot of these levers are medium or long throw. And long throw is very hard on Virtua Fighter, but it's doable, very doable. If the diagonals are easy, it's more doable. If the diagonals are complicated, which is a good thing for like Korean backdashing and is a good thing for Mishima techniques, then it's a good thing for sway characters too, when the diagonals are a little more difficult or more specific, we'll say. But that is really hard on Virtua Fighter. In Virtua Fighter, you need to consistently hit your diagonals 100% when you want to. And you can't just feel it. You can, on some techniques, you can feel it from the primary direction by like sliding from down to down forward or forward to down forward. But in much of Virtua Fighter's gameplay, you can't. In much of Virtua Fighter's gameplay, you need neutral to down forward. You need to be able to hit that diagonal with full confidence. Some players can do that on the Korean Tekken levers, but a lot of people cannot. A lot of people struggle with this, and it is a learning curve, and it will take a lot of training on that stick to really get it, and then the person has to wonder if it's worth it. For me, it's worth it because I'm a fan and a hobbyist. But as a Virtua Fighter player, if I'm going to a tournament right now, I have to go with those three that I mentioned, and I have to kind of say, I really like these Tekken levers, I really like these Fanta-based levers, but I'm still learning it, and I'm not ready to put that in my competition play. And I'm not ready to recommend it to people that are playing Virtua Fighter that are used to like a SANWA JLF, and then they want to try Korean levers. Then I'm going to be like, okay, but you're going to have challenges, because if you're not 100% on your diagonals on that Korean lever, then that's going to affect your Virtua Fighter dramatically. It's going to cause you to get hit it's going to cause you to lose rounds, and that adds up. So it's a big deal. And you have to be able to buffer in a crouch dash without seeing it, because you're going to buffer that so that it comes out as 1 frame instead of as 6 frames. 5 frame for the crouch dash and moving forward, but it's probably an extra frame there of input. So in general, I would say those are not the best for Virtua Fighter. The long throw is a problem for Virtua Fighter in that you're probably going to you're trying to go for accuracy when you go with long throw. You're going for a certain type of accuracy that's more relevant to Tekken, is what I should say. Accuracy in VF is a different thing. Accuracy in Tekken is probably applying it in the Korean backdash and applying it in a Mishima combo. Okay, that's not accuracy in VF. Accuracy in VF again is how can I hit the direction from neutral, not how do I move from the side to neutral and not go to down, right? That's the accuracy you want in Tekken. Is sometimes I want to go to down, sometimes I don't, right? Sometimes I want to go really fast and do the diagonal at a very specific short timing, and sometimes I don't. That's the accuracy you're looking for in Tekken. In Virtua Fighter, the accuracy you're looking for is just, can I hit it from neutral? Or, the earlier case I mentioned, can I hit back into diagonal down forward? Or in Virtua Fighter numeric notation, that's 4-3. The direction 4-3. Using the numpad on your keyboard, you can tell what that means. So anyways, the 4-3 input is something that actually becomes very hard to do on a Korean lever. It's like I might do it 3 times before I get it right when I'm under pressure. So it's one thing to do things in dojo. It's another to do them in play, and it's another to do it in a tournament. And in the tournament, you have a lot more nerves. The higher the level, the higher the tension of nerves, the higher chance you're going to mess up. And you need to simplify it for competitive play, or you need to master something so complicated to turn it into something simple for you. And that's what it means to master your lever and your technique. So those are the things that make it less ideal. Again, we're looking at neutral to direction, then we're looking at stagger breaking, which is direction mashing, speed. And speed matters, accuracy matters. So Virtua Fighter does have I would say for levers, has a bias towards Japanese style. But I do believe there are Korean levers, and there are Korean hybrid levers that are really good for Virtua Fighter. So I'll write more about those later. I'll talk more about those later. Seimitsu I'll talk about later as well. Okay. Let's go to buttons. I'm gonna take a drink here. Yeah, I picked up Panda Express because it's to go and I need to eat in my car. Anyways, so buttons. We'll try to speed through this one, but basically, I love SANWA buttons. Anything with a fast and accurate actuation is good. After that, then you got comfort, padding or no padding. That's up to the player. But also that also means actuation force. How much resistance is that spring? How much resistance does it have when you push the button? That matters on comfort. And then, do you need quiet buttons, or do you like it loud? Now, I like loud buttons, but for competitive Virtua Fighter play, especially offline on console, silent buttons are better, because unless you train yourself to do techniques to disguise your wake-up option by always making it sound like you're mashing buttons, or if you're on an all-button layout, in which case your opponent cannot distinguish between directions and buttons. The big disadvantage that I think arcade controllers with stick have is that you can telegraph your wake-up option in Virtua Fighter when you play offline. And you can telegraph it by looking at it, by the opponent looking at your hands, and it can be telegraphed by just, because when you do ukemi, quick rise tech roll, it's like you're tapping 3 buttons in a direction. And if you're not mashing, well, then I don't think you're trying to roll to the side. I don't think you're trying to stand up by mashing on punch. I don't think you're mashing rising kick, right? So it's very telegraphed. And so quiet buttons help to camouflage it. Technique can camouflage it. Using an all button controller can camouflage it. And frankly, on Gamepad does not have this issue, right? So the biggest weakness of the stick and button combination in Virtua Fighter is telegraphing wake up options in an offline tournament or an offline session on console. It's not an issue in Japanese arcades because they're playing on the opposite side of the crowd net. They're on a head-to-head machine. So I'm playing here, you're playing across the table from me. And I can't see your hands, I can't see your setup. It's too loud in the arcade, so I can't hear whether you're hitting all 3 buttons in a direction at the same time or you're mashing a bunch of buttons. You should learn how to develop mashing techniques anyways. Hit some empty buttons. That will help cover this problem up. But this problem, it shows up in offline sessions. So I will say quieter buttons are better. Okay. Let's talk about comfort really quick on the buttons then. So I love SANWA OBSF buttons. They're really nice and loud, nice and airy, and they clap really hard when I hit them. I love that. But that can be a very sharp feeling for some people too. So Gamerfinger and crown buttons have a very nice softness to them when you push the button, when you bottom them out. And it's pretty nice, and I would say Gamerfinger is even softer. So comfort, Gamerfinger buttons. I am going to flat out and say that I think the best buttons for Virtua Fighter out of what I've played so far are Gamerfinger. My favorites are Crown 202, but I'll rank those number 2 on the list. SANWA OBSF and also the newer SANWA silent buttons, those are like number 3 and 4. I put Quanba Gravity at number 5, but I really need to try Quanba Gravity without the pads. I've heard it's a lot better if I take the pads out. I might try that. But I didn't like stock Quanba Gravity. I just was not a fan. I wanted to like them a lot. But I disliked them for reasons that to me were similar to the Seimitsu. So Seimitsu buttons are not my favorite. When I was young, 20 years ago, I tried Seimitsu button. I thought they were cool because they were more like mushy, right? But nowadays, in my old state, and I do have trigger fingers in both hands, trigger finger is a condition that sucks. But anyways, I can still play VF just fine. It doesn't aggravate it at all. VF is a very ergonomic game, actually. But when I play with Seimitsu buttons, I am tired. My hands are tired after an hour. My hands are very, very tired after an hour. And Quanba Gravity are not far behind on that, for me. And that's why I put them lower. But also, I feel like the actuation is just not as crisp, not as immediate as I like with the other 3, with the SANWA OBSF, with the Crown 202, with the Gamerfinger. So where do I feel about actuation? How do I feel about buttons responses? I got to say the Gamerfinger by far is probably the best one that I felt. You know, right now I do say my favorite buttons are Crown 202s, and they are. But I do think that the performance on the Gamerfinger are better, and they're better in 2 directions. They're better when I push them down, and they're better when I let go. And a really good test, is do a lot of Akira knees, and see how consistently you do those. And I'll tell you that Gamerfinger I do like a lot more consistently than every other button. And then after that, SANWA, OBSF, and the Crown 202s. But I love the feeling and the sound of the Crown 202s now. They've won me over. So Crown 202 is really up there, and I feel like the performance is very, very close. Very, very, very close to a Gamerfinger. But I would say that doing the Akira knee is about the same for me on the SANWAs and the Crown 202s. Don't confuse the Crown 202s with the Crown 101s. The Crown 101s have a terrible reputation, and is actually the reason why a long time ago a lot of people heard that Crown buttons suck. The Crown 202s are really, really good, and they use Cherry MX switches just like the Gamerfinger. On Gamerfinger, do not buy Gamerfinger buttons from the Gamerfinger website. Like the Sanjuks, I think there's one guy making Gamerfinger buttons, and I have a feeling that they're only fulfilling the large orders to Akekon, which is where I buy them from Japan. Akekon is a store, but some of the other Japanese stores have them. But you gotta do your research and be able to navigate those storefronts if you want to buy from the other ones. Akekon is very easy to navigate and easy to buy from, frankly. And that's why I buy from them. But like I'd say once a month they get a haul of Gamerfinger buttons, and you have 1.5 days to get what you want. You probably only have about 3 hours to get the exact model you want, and you can only get 12 buttons per order, and it doesn't matter how you mix and match the colors, still 12 button maximum. So you are going to pay quite a lot in shipping, and I think I calculated that by the end of the shipping and all that, you're going to end up spending close to $11.50 per button after you factor in the shipping one out, and that probably is going to go up because everything is going up. That's no joke. Buttons are going up, micro switches are going up. All of these lever parts, the prices are going up. But again, if you decide, especially because I keep saying that the Gamerfinger is probably the best button, like for sure in my view, objectively the better, even if it's not my favorite, do not buy them from Gamerfinger.com. You will lose your money. If you buy them, I recommend Akekon, and there's a Twitter account to go access that, to see when they're going to announce it. And they were supposed to sell them last week on Monday or Tuesday. However, one of their employees got COVID-19, and they are being very cautious before they reopen, and they're probably going to announce today or tomorrow that, yeah, we're going to open up soon, and then they're probably going to sell them. So I'm expecting them to sell at the end of this week or early next week, probably Monday next week. So if I was to rank them in order, Gamerfinger is definitely my #1 most recommended button for Virtua Fighter. Number 2, and it matters. Number 2 would be the Crown 202s. Number 3 would be the SANWA OBSF, both silent or normal actually. Number 4 out of what I've tried, Quantum Gravity, and then number 5 are probably the Seimitsu buttons. I will give Seimitsu buttons another try later because I might be pleasantly surprised. I will give Quantum Gravity another shot too, and I will try them without the pads inside because I've heard it's so much better when you don't have the pads. So that is levers, that is buttons. If we're talking about everything again for Virtua Fighter, I think arcade levers and buttons, and also the all button layout / things similar to a hitbox or a snack box micro. Those to me are my favorite devices for Virtua Fighter. I've consistently seen top performances on those platforms. After that, Gamepad. So Gamepad, one of the very best players in the country uses Gamepad, and that's Denkai. And there's a lot of really good players like Admiring My Harley that use a Gamepad. Gamepad is legit in Virtua Fighter. What are the challenges I've seen? The challenges for sure that I've seen with the Gamepad. One, a lot of Gamepad users like to use macros, and it makes sense for Virtua Fighter to use macros, especially if you're using a default layout that uses guard, punch, and kick on like square, triangle, and circle. When I play Virtua Fighter on a Gamepad, and I do it because I like to teach Virtua Fighter wherever I'm at, and sometimes I'm at someone's house and we're playing on a pad. So I actually emulate the arcade stick layout. In the arcade stick, the Japanese arcade stick layout, thumb is guard, index finger is punch, middle finger is kick. So this is how I play Virtua Fighter on an arcade stick with the buttons. These 3 fingers. So what about Gamepad? Well, I put my thumb on square. I put my index on R1, and as odd as the triggers are, I do use my middle finger on R2, Virtua Fighter is not that terribly picky. Like, it needs actuation, but it doesn't need like this insane precision that trigger is going to screw up if you actually try playing like this. And this method, very ergonomic. I don't need macros to do this, to do these. I still ukemi with all three. I still throw with index and thumb. I still do crescent kick or sweep with kick and guard. I can still kind of do Akira's knee. It's kind of hard. Okay. It's actually really hard. So the big disadvantage, so the problem with macros on Gamepad, when you're learning a character, there's generic stuff you do first, and then you start to learn the details. And when you use the ergonomic layout, you won't have many problems. But if you're a player that's using macros, there's going to be a time when you start to rethink how you do half of your techniques because you want to change what macro you want to use to do it, or what you want to do in this situation. And you kind of tie your hands in knots with the macros. It doesn't mean it's impossible. It's not. Everything's possible with the macros. It just means that you have to keep readjusting your complicated layout in your head to what you're doing. And some players can do this so good, so that's fine. For me, it's not necessary, and Virtua Fighter is much simpler than that. And as long as I can do ergonomics with these three fingers, I'm good. Okay. So the hard things to do on a gamepad compared to the others, Akira's knee is number one. I anticipate this problem not to be a factor in the next Virtua Fighter game. I think Virtua Fighter 5 Ultimate Showdown will be the last time Akira's knee is hard to do on a gamepad. Because I think Sega is designing the next Virtua Fighter game to be all button friendly, to be gamepad friendly, to be keyboard friendly, and to be arcade stick friendly, right? In the past, Virtua Fighter games were all designed to come out on arcade first, all designed to do well in arcade. And so they all needed to, so they all only cared about that. They didn't have to care about gamepad. Akira's knee is the type of input that screws up a gamepad player. I've watched so many players try to get it down on gamepad. It's so hard. The best trick is to use macros and like hit two certain buttons, one that's kick and guard and the other is like guard, and just let go of the kick and guard one really quick, like, you know. That's probably the best way to do it on gamepad. And if you can do it consistently that way, then you're fine. You don't have that problem anymore. I've heard rumors that some players have trouble with like ECD and some of the option selects on gamepad. I don't really buy that. I think it's a matter of technique. I think it's a matter of understanding the technique or having felt it already. And I will say my biggest advice on any of the techniques that require crouch dash. Crouch dash is a funny technique where you want to be holding down forward, the second down forward input, a little longer than you might expect for it to register, for it to work. And that might be what's causing people on gamepad to have trouble. They might be just double tapping down forward. And then they're like, why is it not buffering? When the game actually wants you to do down forward and then down forward and hold for like a few frames. Try that. That might fix all the problems that anybody has with evade crouch dash. So you tap like up, then you do down forward again, but hold down forward for just a few frames. It's probably going to work way better for you. So I don't see a reason for gamepad to not be a really powerful device. We already know some of the top players around play on a gamepad, and so gamepad is legit. But I way like arcade lovers more, and I do like the all button layout more than a gamepad. But I will still play gamepad with friends because I want to teach VF and play VF with everyone I know. And I have friends who have the game on their console and only have gamepads. Bring it on, let's play. I'm not going to make excuses. I still end up winning anyways. But, and I've been doing that since VF4. I've been doing that forever, since since the Sega Saturn. So there's no excuses there. I'll give some tips though on WASD, but I really don't like WASD. I don't like WASD again because your middle finger is doing double duty up and down, and that is a real pain with like evade crouch dash. I would prefer you do ASD with the space bar, which is a method I talked about earlier, or you do all button layout. I prefer those a lot more than the WASD. ASD space is fantastic. So what are the tips though for an ASD, a WASD, or even an all button? Because of the way the buffer works, you have to practice in training mode half circular motions. Some games buffer them for a very specific timing, and the human tendency is to try to race those so fast that it doesn't even register the diagonals in between them. So practice doing half circulars in training mode, get the feel, understand that's going to be the rhythm component. Okay. Where do I feel in all button controllers in VF? I think they're incredibly powerful. I think for me, let's talk about arcade levers versus all button. When I play all levers in Virtua Fighter, it captures me a feeling that I feel the developers want the player to feel when they play Virtua Fighter. That feel, the way that you feel when you're watching, the way you feel when you do like an ECD, but you're watching to see if the opponent did something or another thing, and then you react to it. The way you dash and watch while the lever's in neutral. There's a rhythm and a feel that just feels really good, but it is similar to a martial arts in that you're trying to master your body, you're trying to master your weapons. There's a feeling like that, like when you practice on a Wing Chun dummy and you're mastering the spacing of the arms and the legs on the Wing Chun dummy, and so you're working around something. That's the feeling of an arcade lever, and I personally love that feeling. Okay, so now that I've said that for arcade levers, what about all button controllers? With the all button controllers, I would, and this is not a diss, this is actually a compliment, so understand this first. It's like you're typing your moves. It's so abstract that it's not like you're trying to intuitively do these motions anymore. You're just flat out learning them the way you learned how to type words really fast and learned how to type sentence fragments really fast. It's typing to play, and that's nothing wrong with that. It might be less romantic, but there is definitely a rush for certain people when they feel that, because I would say if you watch the first Matrix, it's like Neo going, I know Kung Fu. It's kind of like that, except that you have to go through training to kind of type enough times to where it feels like that. But once you're there, you don't get your, like, you don't feel like you're going to get your hands tied the way you might with an arcade lever and buttons, right? We're doing Kung Fu and, oh my God, I did this technique and this, and now I can't do this other because my body won't move there. Then you do all button layout and you feel like the punch just comes out, the kick just comes out, the headbutt comes out, the guard comes out, everything just does it on its own with you typing it out. And that's why I compare it to suddenly Neo going, like, you know, blocking all of Mr. Smith's moves without thinking about it. It removes this layer of trying to work around the arcade stick and replace it with how accurately can you type the move that you're doing. And that's a very powerful thing. It might be less romantic for me, and it might be like I still want to play on arcade lever and buttons, and I think in Virtua Fighter so far, you're not a better player because you use an all button layout, but it might work better for you. But the arcade lever might also work better for you, and you might do amazing stuff. I've seen amazing footwork done with the all button layout on Virtua Fighter, but the Japanese players playing on lever, Dennis 0201 in America playing on lever, still shows me the best movement in the game. Maybe if they switch to all button, will it take their movement to another level? I really don't know. I have doubts because I feel like they're doing the limits of the game on there. But do I think people could do better movement when they switch to all button layout? I do think it's possible. I think players that are not doing the peak performance can climb higher in their performance with the all button layout. So I definitely am not discouraging it. If anything, I'm kind of recommending it, but also saying, yeah, like, it's a wonderful feeling and you're gonna love it. I happen to love arcade lever more than that feeling, but I think a lot of people will love all button, and I think a lot of people might find that all button's better for them. I think if my hand situations were worse, if my hands were more damaged, all button might be really good for me. But actually, I've seen people play on all button do get fatigued quite a lot too. It can still be very fatiguing, especially the left hand. Juicebox and I both agree. One of the issues with the all button layout is the left hand, especially the left middle finger and ring finger. These two fingers are going to drive you nuts. You're going to feel cramping in them a little more if you've played some, but you also do build muscle memory like anything else. Martial arts, you're building more muscle memory. You're building more synaptic connection to the thing you want to do. So suddenly you become sharper. Same thing with an all button layout. Muscle memory, synaptic response, association, and then also the unlearning process where as you get better and better at something and you do it more and more in context and situations, you lower the cognitive load it takes on your mind. You really dramatically lower that cognitive load so that your ability to focus and observe improves, and you can apply it to other things instead of just trying to do a technique. The biggest disadvantage for all button layouts though is that it's super unintuitive, and so you're going to have to memorize every technique, player one side, player two side, a bit separately, and you're just going to have to get used to just no longer really seeing them as motions and just seeing them as techniques you just kind of type out. And when you do that, that alone is powerful. Actually, it's really good. So that's why I put both stick and buttons and all button controllers at the height of, in my view, the better controllers for Virtua Fighter. But Gamepad is not far behind. It can make up for every deficit you might consider. It's up to the player. It's preference. WASD, I'm not ruling it out. I just personally hate WASD layout. So, but again, if you have a thumbs up on a WASD, I think it's just as good as an all button layout. However, I do think the buttons on all button layouts, the arcade buttons, are so good. I think they're so amazing, and I think the game still rewards you for using those. Even if you are using the same keyboard micro switches inside those buttons versus the WASD key buttons, right? It seems unintuitive, but the form factor does matter, and on arcade buttons, they're just better for mashing and better for doing all kinds of stuff. I've heard someone say that on all buttons it's hard to break stagger. I think it's just a matter of learning the technique. I think if you figure out what the technique is and then you also recognize the situation when you're going to get staggered, then I think you're going to solve your problem. And I think a person on an all button controller is doing just as well, maybe even better, than a person on the lever at breaking staggers. It's just a matter of technique, awareness of when that stagger is going to happen, and just being ready for it, just like everything else in Virtua Fighter. So that's my take on all that. I hope you enjoyed my chat about arcade controller parts in Virtua Fighter. I'm going to repeat again. For sticks, currently, my favorite sticks are modified SANWA with the Otto V5, Sanjuks V3, golden lever modified to your preference, but ideally towards in the Japanese direction. I have not yet reviewed Seimitsu levers. I still am going to be re-reviewing and keep trying out a lot of Korean levers, and actually a lot of crown levers have a lot of promise, so I'm going to be checking those out. And those might surprise me, because there's a lot of hybrids in there, a lot of things that are made to appeal to people that use Japanese sticks. Buttons, again, Gamerfinger is at the very top for me, but do not buy them from gamerfinger.com. You've been warned. If you do that, you will lose your money. And you can DM me and I can tell you why I think that is. And I can tell you where I get them, but it does cost. But you can also buy them from other players. 2 Crown 202s are my second most recommended, and they are my personal favorite. SANWA OBSF, and then the silent SANWA OBSF right after them. And then after that is Kwanba Gravity, and then Seimitsu. But I will eventually retry these and give them a better fair shake and see if they might move up the ladder. So that's my recommendation there. And if you have any more questions, please leave them in the comments for me. And if you have any other questions or topics you want to cover, also put those in the comments. Feel free to like and subscribe. It's been a lot of fun chatting with y'all, and I hope to be chatting with y'all more. Hope to be sharing my views and sharing experiences and hearing about your experiences too. Thank you very much.